I was halfway through dismantling a convoluted backlog of vendor invoices when the email hit my inbox. The subject line was highlighted in stark red text: Confident Share, FY 2024 Comp Adjustments. The problem was, it had already been shared with the entire operations team. Kyle, the newly hired 24-year-old HR director, who spent more time updating his LinkedIn profile than actually managing personnel, had fat-fingered the distribution list. He had blasted out a master spreadsheet that was obviously never meant to see the light of day, let alone the inbox of every employee on the floor. I clicked on it out of pure reflex, expecting a frantic follow-up message recalling the email within seconds. It didn't happen. The corporate machine is notoriously slow when it comes to fixing its own catastrophic mistakes. Instead, I sat there in the sterile fluorescent-lit silence of my cubicle, the bitter taste of cold break room coffee in my mouth, staring at line after line of unfiltered raw salary data. I recognized the names. I knew these people. I had trained almost every single one of them. To the floor, I was the human Wikipedia page for finance operations. Whenever the system crashed, whenever a reconciliation didn't balance, whenever an auditor asked a question that made the junior analysts sweat through their designer shirts, they came to me. My eyes scanned the columns: Mason Reeves, 2 years on the job, title, Senior Financial Analyst. Salary, $143. Trent Adler, 8 months on the job. Title, Strategic Operations Liaison. Salary, $139. Vanessa Lynn, 13 months on the job. Title, Operations Coordinator. Salary, $140. $500. And then, down at the bottom of the sheet, buried under the heavy weight of the corporate hierarchy, was my name. Jason Keller, 11 years on the job. Title, Financial Operations Specialist. Salary, $102. 900s. I blinked a few times. I leaned closer to the monitor, thinking that perhaps my 58-year-old eyes were playing tricks on me in the harsh blue light of the screen. I traced the line with my finger. No, there was no mistake. I slowly looked up from my monitor. Across the room, through the glass partition of the open concept workspace, I could see Mason. He had his expensive leather loafers kicked up on his desk, his headset on, laughing hysterically at some YouTube video playing on his secondary monitor. This was the exact same Mason who, just last Tuesday, had asked me to explain the concept of a deferred asset. I had to literally draw a diagram on a whiteboard for him, using 4 bullet points and basic elementary math. Yet, the corporate ledger dictated that his strategic vision was worth $40,000 a year, more than my decades of grounded, practical expertise. Before we dive into exactly how I systematically dismantled this corrupt corporate infrastructure, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and tell me in the comments down below, what time is it where you are right now? To the executives and arrogant kids like Mason, I was just the quiet, gray-haired man riding out the clock to retirement. What they didn't know was my actual history. Before taking this job for a quiet civilian life, I was a senior intelligence auditor for the United States military. For 22 years, my job was to hunt down millions of dollars in stolen military funds in active combat zones. I knew how to follow a digital blood trail better than anyone alive. When I retired, I just wanted peace to pay for my son's medical school tuition. I played the docile employee perfectly, but looking at that spreadsheet, the intelligence auditor woke up. I didn't rage. I didn't stand up and throw my coffee cup against the wall. I didn't make a scene that would get me escorted out of the building by security. I operated with absolute chilling military precision. I inserted a highly encrypted, personal flash drive into my terminal. I saved the master spreadsheet, bypassed the internal network monitors using a ghost protocol I had written years ago, and closed all my active windows. Then, I stood up and walked straight toward the corner office of my immediate supervisor, Ray. Ray, the director of operations, possessed the moral backbone of a jellyfish. I didn't knock, I simply pushed the glass door open, dropped my laptop on his desk, and stared at him. "I need to understand this," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. Ray looked at the screen, feigning ignorance. He immediately launched into rehearsed corporate garbage about macroeconomic factors, hiring brackets, and policy caps. No apology, just hollow HR-approved excuses designed to gaslight me into submission. Then came the real kicker. Ray steepled his fingers, offering a patronizing smile. "You've always been a solid worker, Jason. But this is the structure. Take it or leave it. Take it or leave it. I didn't say a single word back. When an enemy exposes their flank, you don't warn them. You pull the trigger. I nodded once, picked up my laptop, and walked out of his office. Calm, focused, lethal. That night, when I got back to my apartment, I didn't pour myself a glass of scotch. I didn't vent to my friends. I didn't pace around the living room wondering how life could be so unfair. I sat down at my kitchen table, opened my encrypted laptop, cracked my knuckles, and started building a new spreadsheet. But this spreadsheet wasn't for work. This one was for war. I worked straight through the night. I didn't eat dinner. I didn't even stand up except to refill my coffee mug. The spreadsheet grew by the hour. This wasn't some half-assed, desperate brag sheet begging for a raise. I was building a full, comprehensive, military-grade operational analysis, detailing exactly what I had done, what I had built, and exactly how much money I had saved this corrupt corporation over the last decade. Every single year had its own dedicated tab, backed by irrefutable digital evidence. 2013. Junior accountant, entry level. I built the very first version of our automated reconciliation tool entirely from scratch, utilizing advanced macros that no one else in the building understood. It was the exact same tool they still relied on today to process billions of dollars. 2014. I flagged a highly sophisticated vendor double invoicing scheme that the internal audit team missed entirely. It would have cost the company over $600,000 if I hadn't been paying attention. I received no bonus, not even a formal thank you email. 2015 to 2020. 5 brutal years of system overhauls, endless process documentation, maintaining clean audits, and surviving massive turnover nightmares. Every single time a manager quit or got fired, I quietly picked up the slack. I trained the new, arrogant kids, smiled through the condescension, and kept the lights on. 2021. I handled a massive 6-figure reconciliation project, completely solo during a catastrophic system migration. Upper management swore it would require an elite team of 4 consultants. I finished it under budget, and 3 weeks ahead of the deadline. 2022. I stopped a fatal error in our proprietary forecasting model that would have caused a supply chain overbuy, resulting in over $900,000 in dead, unmovable inventory. I caught it with a red pen and a basic spreadsheet while the executives were at a golf retreat. No shortfalls, no write-ups, no missed deadlines. 11 years of an absolutely flawless operational record. And what was my reward? A standard 3% annual cost of living raise, while the very kids I trained blew past me in 8 months, making 40 grand more to watch YouTube and ask me how to do their jobs. By 4 a.m., the document was complete. I titled it, The Hidden Cost of Loyalty, a Financial and Operational Impact Analysis. It was 51 pages long. Every single claim was meticulously backed by internal documentation, time-stamped emails, and data logs. The final page contained the kill shot, a clean, undeniable summary. In the last 12 months alone, the automated workflows I built and managed entirely by myself saved the company exactly $312. 8 salary gap, compared to the junior hires for that same period was $39, $100. I didn't just email it to them. That was too passive. I exported the file, drove downtown to the 24-hour FedEx printing center, and had it professionally bound. I requested the heavy cardstock cover. I wanted them to feel the physical weight of their own incompetence. The title page was printed in bold, authoritarian font, with my name sitting quietly right underneath it. Before 6 a.m., I was back in my apartment. The shower was running, steam fogging up the bathroom mirror. I shaved carefully. I reached into the back of my closet and pulled out the charcoal suit with the subtle blue pinstripe. It was the exact same suit I had worn to my father's funeral. I didn't wear it because I was sad. I wore it because it reminded me of who I am when the emotional noise fades away. It reminded me of the man who stopped making excuses for weak people. At exactly 7:20 a.m., I walked through the sliding glass doors of the corporate headquarters. I didn't look like the quiet guy from the corner cubicle anymore. I walked with the heavy, measured stride of a commander walking into a briefing room. I bypassed my floor entirely. I took the executive elevator straight to the top floor. I ignored the panicked protests of the senior receptionist and walked straight toward the massive glass doors of the CEO's office. Garrett, the CEO, wasn't in yet, it didn't matter. I walked into his pristine, over-decorated office and dropped 3 distinct items dead center on his sprawling mahogany desk. First, my resignation letter, printed on heavy stock, signed and dated. Second, a formal job offer I had quietly secured 2 days prior from the Holston Advisory Group, our largest and most aggressive competitor. The offer clearly stated $150 base salary, plus full executive benefits. And third, the 51-page bound report. I didn't leave a sticky note. I didn't wait around for him to arrive. The ambush was set. I turned around, walked back to the elevator, and rode it down to my floor. I walked back to my desk, sat down, and started going through my emails, exactly like I had done every morning for the last 11 years. 2 seats down, Mason was aggressively tapping his keyboard, arguing with his monitor about some macro formula that wasn't functioning correctly. It was the exact same macro formula I had built from scratch 6 years ago. Across the aisle, Trent was pacing around on a headset, trying to sound incredibly important while actively misinterpreting a basic vendor contract. Vanessa had her AirPods in, aimlessly clicking through a reporting template that I had written for her the previous quarter. I didn't say a word to any of them. I didn't glance in their direction. I just kept working. I wasn't there to cause a dramatic scene or yell at the junior staff. I was there to execute a strategic maneuver, and by the time the executives on the top floor realized what was happening, the artillery was already inbound. At exactly 10:04 a.m., the internal messenger on my screen chimed. Jason, Elm Room. Now, the message was from Ray, no pleasantries, no context. Inside the Elm Room, Garrett, the CEO, sat at the head of the table. Marissa, the COO, Ray, and Kyle from HR sat rigidly around my 51-page report. Garrett gestured toward the empty chair. Have a seat, Jason. I didn't move. In any negotiation, giving up the high ground is a tactical error. Garrett cleared his throat. Your analysis is extensive, so is my tenure, I replied blankly. Kyle stammered out corporate buzzwords about outdated HR records and compensation matrices. I'm not asking for clarification, I cut in. I've already made my decision. Ray leaned forward with a look of fake, brotherly concern. Jason, come on, 3% annual is the standard policy cap. You got your 3% last year. We can't just break the rules. You broke the rules when you hired a 24-year-old with zero experience for $40,000 more than the man writing his operational manuals, I replied, staring a hole straight through him. Ray leaned back instantly, his lips pressing into a thin, humiliated line. Garrett sighed, folding his hands on top of my report. He looked at me, assessing the damage. Let me ask you this directly. What would it take for you to stay? I didn't hesitate. I didn't need to consult my notes. A complete salary match at $150, effective immediately, I stated, my voice echoing off the glass walls. Back pay for the entire last fiscal year to compensate for the discrepancy. You can categorize it as an operational bonus, and I want a formal, third-party internal pay equity review conducted for the entire department. Kyle actually gasped, a sharp, audible intake of air, as if I had just demanded the deed to the entire building. Marissa didn't say a word. She just kept staring at me, her eyes tracking back and forth as she tried to calculate the massive return on investment of keeping me versus the catastrophic operational cost of letting me walk. Garrett scratched his jaw, his eyes narrowing. You're asking for a lot, Jason. No, Garrett. I corrected him quietly. I'm asking for exactly what I am worth, and exactly what I have already earned. You are currently getting a massive discount. Nobody moved, nobody said a word. The silence in the Elm Room was suffocating. Finally, Garrett leaned forward, resting his elbows heavily on the table. We'll need 24 hours to review this with the board. I shook my head slowly. You have until tomorrow morning. That resignation clock is ticking. Garrett, and I assure you I am not bluffing. Kyle started to open his mouth, likely to spout another HR protocol about standard notice periods, but Garrett immediately waved him off, silencing him. You'll hear from us soon, Garrett said softly. I nodded once, turned on my heel, and walked out without another word. I went straight back to my desk. I didn't pack up my personal belongings. I sat down, opened the month-end close schedule, checked off the first 3 critical items, logged a major bug in the new reporting tool, and forwarded a complex vendor query to accounts payable. They were probably still in the Elm Room, scrambling, whispering frantically, wondering how the quiet old man in the corner knew exactly what they were trying to hide, and wondering how they had completely failed to realize my actual value for 11 years. But I had already moved on. I was already calculating the next phase of the operation. They didn't wait 24 hours. At exactly 1:23 p.m., barely 3 hours after I had walked out of the Elm Room, Ray appeared at my cubicle. He looked incredibly pale, as if all the blood had been drained from his slick, arrogant face. "Conference room Maple," he mumbled, refusing to make eye contact with me. This time, they brought reinforcements. I stood up and followed him down the hall. The Maple Room was the largest boardroom on the floor, reserved exclusively for high-stakes executive negotiations. When I walked in, Garrett and Marissa were already seated on one side of the massive table, their shoulders tight with stress. Kyle from HR was gone, which meant this was no longer a personnel issue. This was a legal issue. Sitting at the center of the table was a man I recognized immediately. Fred Vance, the company's senior legal counsel. He wore a sharp blue suit, a shiny Rolex, and a massive predatory smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. "Jason, glad you could join us," Fred said loudly, standing up as if we were old war buddies. I didn't shake his extended hand. I just sat down in the chair opposite him, perfectly still, waiting. Garrett cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the room. "We took your concerns very seriously, Jason," he said smoothly, sliding a thick, embossed folder across the polished table. "This is our revised offer." I opened the folder. The terms were staggering. Title: Director of Financial Strategy. Base salary: $155,000. Bonus structure: $45 performance-based payout, guaranteed for the first year. Full access to all executive board meetings, direct oversight of strategic initiatives, and a permanent seat on the Internal Audit Committee. It was literally everything I had demanded in the Elm Room, plus a $50,000 premium to ensure I stayed. It was almost too much. In the military, when the enemy surrenders that quickly and offers you more territory than you requested, it means you're walking into a minefield. Then, Fred reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a second, significantly thinner folder. He slid it across the table and tapped it with his manicured finger. "And this," Fred said, his voice dripping with faux casual indifference, "is just a standard, routine update to your confidentiality agreement. Given your new, highly sensitive position on the executive tier, we just need to button up a few protocols." I flipped the thin folder open. I didn't scan it. I read it with the trained eye of an intelligence auditor. There it was, buried on page 6, hidden behind walls of dense legalese, were 3 highly specific, aggressively worded clauses. They weren't standard ND as about trade secrets or client lists. These clauses specifically prohibited me from discussing, reporting, or documenting any unusual compensation structures or internal financial flow anomalies without the direct written consent of the senior legal counsel. They wanted to muzzle me. "You're making the promotion conditional on this specific non-disclosure agreement," I said, not looking up from the page. "Not at all, Jason," Fred lied smoothly, leaning back in his chair. "It's just routine housekeeping, standard procedure for anyone ascending to the director level." Marissa watched me closely, her arms folded, her eyes tracking my every micro-expression. Garrett kept adjusting his expensive cufflink, looking everywhere, except at me. He looked like a man waiting for a bomb to detonate. I slowly closed the folder and rested my hands on top of it. "I'll need time to review this with my own counsel," I said calmly. Fred nodded, his predatory smile returning. "Of course, take your time. Just let us know by tomorrow morning." I stood up, picked up both folders, and walked out of the Maple Room without saying another word. As soon as I got back to the sanctuary of my desk, I pulled out my personal phone and sent a secure, encrypted text message to Gavin, the senior partner at the Holston Advisory Group. They bit, promotion offered, highly restrictive NDA included, proceeding to phase 2. His reply came through almost instantly. "Perfect, keep control, finish them." They genuinely thought they had me locked in. They thought the massive salary bump and the prestigious new title would blind me to the lethal trap buried in the non-disclosure agreement. They assumed I was just another greedy corporate climber who could be bought off. They had absolutely no idea who they were dealing with. For the last 18 months, I had been operating as a ghost in the machine. While the arrogant young hires were watching YouTube and asking me to explain basic accounting principles, I was quietly tracking a highly sophisticated series of vendor payments that fundamentally did not add up. These weren't simple data entry mistakes. They were calculated, deliberate patterns. I found fake company names. I found persistent rounding errors that always, without fail, leaned in one specific financial direction. I tracked massive, six-figure payments routed to P.O. boxes that possessed no physical corporate address. And most damning of all, every single one of those anomalous transfers was signed off by the exact same two executive signatures every single time. Most people in the finance department wouldn't have noticed the discrepancies. The few who did notice would have instantly looked the other way, terrified of losing their jobs if they questioned the executive tier. But I didn't look away. I was a trained intelligence auditor. I cataloged everything. I recorded the exact times, dates, digital signatures, and convoluted approval chains. I even archived the internal emails from the senior managers who were aggressively pushing these specific payments through the system with incredibly weak, practically non-existent business justifications. I never confronted anyone directly. I never raised a red flag to HR. I just quietly, methodically built the dossier. And now, here they were, handing me a targeted NDA directly after offering me a massive promotion, acting as if I wouldn't immediately realize the timing was a desperate attempt to cover their tracks. They didn't know I already possessed the ultimate leverage. This wasn't just about a severely delayed pay raise anymore. It hadn't been about the money for a very long time. They thought I was trying to climb their corrupt corporate ladder. In reality, I was building the gallows. Day 15 arrived. Technically, I was past my official resignation date, but HR had requested that I attend one final meeting to wrap things up. That's exactly what Kyle had called it in his polite, generic email, a final sit-down to close the loop. He made it sound like we were just buttoning up a happy little HR package and putting a nice bow on top. What the executives didn't realize was that the bow was actually a noose, and I had already tied the knot. This time, the meeting was in the Cedar Room. It was the largest conference room in the entire building, featuring massive panoramic windows and heavily soundproofed walls. The anxious tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. Garrett was already there when I walked in. He was trying to look casual, wearing an expensive Patagonia vest over a crisp collared shirt, but his eyes were darting nervously. Fred, the legal counsel, was seated directly next to him, remaining completely silent as he aggressively flipped through a thick yellow legal pad, looking like a defense attorney desperately prepping for a federal trial. Marissa stood near the window, her arms crossed tight against her chest. She looked exhausted, as if she hadn't slept in a week. At the far end of the massive table, a large high-definition screen was set up. A few seconds after I took my seat, the video call connected. Amara Fulton, the ruthless, highly respected chair of the board of directors, appeared on the screen. Her face was severe. She offered no smile, no polite corporate greeting. She went straight to business. "Let's begin," Amara commanded, her voice cutting through the room speakers. Garrett stood up, attempting to deploy a smooth, friendly, completely fake tone. "Thank you for your patience, Jason. I cut him off instantly." I reached into my leather briefcase and dropped a slim, stark black folder dead center on the polished table. The loud smack echoed against the glass walls. "Before we finalize any compensation agreements or sign any restrictive non-disclosure documents," I stated, my voice projecting with the cold, absolute authority of a military commander, "there is one final operational matter that must be addressed. You currently have a $7 million embezzlement issue operating within this building." You could literally hear the oxygen leave the room. Garrett froze mid-step, his mouth hanging slightly open. Fred's expensive silver pen slipped out of his fingers and clattered loudly onto the table. Marissa slowly turned away from the window, her eyes widening in pure horror. I didn't wait for them to recover. I opened the black folder and laid out the very first page for the camera to see. "This is a highly detailed transaction map covering the last 18 months, I explained, tapping the complex web of financial data. "These are all flagged, unauthorized payments. They have been routed to fake vendors using P.O. boxes linked to addresses that possess no physical corporate offices. The payment amounts have been growing slowly, quarter by quarter, expertly calculated to stay exactly $100 under the internal audit threshold. I flipped to its page. This is a comprehensive list of specific vendor identification numbers that were created manually, entirely outside of the standard procurement system. Someone with high-level executive access authorized them. I flipped to the third page, my eyes locking directly onto Fred. And this is where the entire digital blood trail leads. A shadow holding company, operating under the name Pinegrove Partners. Fred immediately stiffened, his posture going rigid. I have absolutely never heard of that company, he lied, his voice remarkably steady for a man staring down the barrel of a federal indictment. That's funny, Fred, I said, sliding the next piece of paper directly across the table toward him. Because, according to this public corporate filing from the state of Delaware, Pinegrove Partners is legally registered to your brother-in-law. Fred opened his mouth to speak, a flush of dark red anger creeping up his neck. Hold on, Fred, I'm not finished, I commanded, flipping to the final fatal page. This one is my absolute favorite. It's the kill shot. I turned the page so the camera could clearly capture the image. These are your digital initials, Fred, I said, my voice ringing out like a judge reading a guilty verdict. You personally authorized quarterly budget adjustments to accounts payable. Those adjustments miraculously match the Pinegrove Partners embezzlement trail to the exact dollar on 3 separate occasions. Fred slammed his legal pad shut so hard it echoed. He stood up, pointing a trembling finger at me. This is an outrage. This is a baseless, fabricated accusation from a disgruntled employee. It's data, Fred, I replied coldly, staring him down without blinking. Data doesn't lie. Data doesn't fabricate. It's not an accusation. It's a digital execution. Marissa didn't say a single word. She just stared at Fred, her face pale, watching the senior legal counsel implode like a bridge collapsing in slow motion. Amara's voice came through the screen, sharp, low, and vibrating with absolute fury. We will be bringing in external forensic auditors immediately. Fred, do not leave this building. You are to stay exactly where you are until security escorts you to a holding room. Fred ignored the direct order from the chair of the board. He grabbed his briefcase and moved toward the door. Garrett finally snapped out of his paralyzed state. He stepped in front of Fred, desperately trying to get ahead of the massive PR nightmare that was about to destroy his career. Fred, Garrett said, his voice cracking with panic. Don't do this, stop. But Fred didn't stop. He shoved past the CEO and stormed toward the exit. He didn't make it far. 2 massive corporate security guards, the ones I had quietly requested the receptionist position outside the cedar room before the meeting began, stepped inside. They flanked Fred immediately, grabbing him by the arms. I know my legal rights, Fred barked, struggling against their grip. You people have absolutely no idea what you're doing. One of the security guards didn't even flinch. He gestured calmly down the hall. Let's take this to the holding room, sir. They hauled him out of the conference room. Nobody said a word for a full agonizing 10 seconds. The only sound was the low hum of the air conditioning unit. Then, Amara spoke from the screen. Jason, please forward every single piece of intelligence you have gathered to the board's emergency audit committee immediately. Include all supporting documentation, emails, and data logs. It's already queued up on the secure server, I replied. You will have full access within the hour. Garrett looked like he had been physically shot in the gut. He slowly sat down in his chair, his eyes locked on the empty space where his senior legal counsel had just been sitting. This wasn't a corporate wrap-up meeting anymore. It was a crime scene cleanup. By the time I walked back to my desk to collect my personal belongings, the entire atmosphere of the building had fundamentally shifted. It was quiet, but not the usual hum of a productive corporate environment. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a battlefield after an artillery strike. Everyone had heard the massive explosion, but no one wanted to be the first to admit that the command structure had just been obliterated. The fallout was immediate, brutal, and highly public. Fred was permanently terminated by morning. He was walked out of the building by security and corporate investigators, carrying a single cardboard box of personal files that the legal team had thoroughly vetted. He is currently under federal investigation for massive corporate fraud. 2 mid-level accounting staff, Amanda and Josh, were immediately suspended pending a full forensic review. I didn't know if they were actively in on Fred's embezzlement scheme or if they were just too fundamentally incompetent to notice the massive anomalies flowing through their department. In the end, it didn't really matter. Their careers in finance were completely destroyed. Garrett, the so-called visionary CEO, had a total meltdown. The following Monday, he was forced to deliver a pathetic, groveling public apology during the executive all-hands call. His voice literally shook as he tried to deploy corporate buzzwords about restoring integrity and rebuilding foundational trust. It was embarrassing to watch. And then, there was Ray, the arrogant manager who told me to take it or leave it. It turns out Ray wasn't actively involved in the embezzlement scheme. He was just asleep at the wheel, rubber-stamping Fred's fraudulent approvals, because he was too lazy to actually do the hard work of verifying the ledgers. The board found him completely negligent. They didn't fire him, but they stripped him of his title, gutted his salary, and moved him into a low-level technical support role. He now sits in the back room with the exact same junior employees he used to condescend to, answering basic IT tickets with absolutely zero influence. 2 days before my official start date at the Holston Advisory Group, my personal phone rang. The caller ID showed Garrett's personal cell number. No administrative assistant filtering the call. I picked it up. "Jason," Garrett said, desperately trying to sound relaxed and in control. "Look, I know things ended abruptly, but our internal team is really struggling to operate the automated systems you built. We'd like to bring you back on as an external consultant." Just to get us through the quarter, I didn't even flinch. I felt absolutely nothing for him. "Garrett, there is a comprehensive 60-day knowledge transfer binder located on the secure shared drive," I informed him coldly. "I left it there on the exact day I handed you my resignation." He went dead quiet on the other end of the line. Then he let out a heavy, defeated sigh. "Jason, we didn't open the binder. The junior staff couldn't understand the technical indexing. Look, name your price, whatever is reasonable. We just desperately need your help getting through this transition." I didn't yell at him. I didn't gloat. I didn't tell him. I told him so. I just delivered the absolute, uncompromising truth. "My price, Garrett, was 11 years of fair treatment," I said softly. Then I hung up the phone. No goodbye, no well wishes. I let him sit in the silence of his own collapsing empire. My first day at Holston Advisory Group, I walked through the heavy glass doors at exactly 8:02 a.m. sharp. I didn't go to a corner cubicle. I walked down the executive hallway toward a massive, glass-paneled corner office. My name was already engraved on the brushed steel placard on the door. Jason H. Keller, Chief Financial Officer. Inside, a pristine, organized desk waited for me. I had a brand-new encrypted laptop, a fresh, leather notepad, and a sweeping view of the downtown skyline that actually made the brutal morning traffic seem worth the effort. Gavin, the senior partner, met me in the hallway holding 2 cups of black coffee and a massive, predatory grin. "You ready to build something better, Jason?" "I've been ready for a decade," I replied, taking the coffee. We didn't waste a single second. Within 6 months of taking the CFO position, we systematically poached 3 of my former firm's biggest, most lucrative corporate clients. They were the exact same clients I used to manage from the shadows, while Garrett and Ray took all the credit. By the end of the fiscal year, Holston was named the absolute best mid-size financial advisory firm in the region for corporate transparency. I didn't just take the prestigious title. I built a totally incorruptible system. I implemented open, highly transparent salary bands. No more corporate guessing games. No more 24-year-olds making 40 grand more than the veterans training them. I instituted brutal quarterly performance reviews based on actual verifiable metrics, not corporate favoritism. I built internal audit channels that functioned flawlessly and a standing whistleblower policy with anonymous, direct-to-board escalation protocols. There were no more buried red flags under my command. I made damn sure that nobody got passed over, ignored, or forgotten under my watch. Not on my team, not on my time. Meanwhile, my old company started circling the drain. Garrett was officially ousted by the board 6 months after the forensic audit concluded. The corporate press release claimed he stepped down to pursue other strategic opportunities. But everyone in the industry knew the truth. Marissa quit before a hostile acquisition closed, leaving behind a pathetic 5-line email and a desk full of toxic files that no one wanted to touch. Sometimes, I think about how different things could have been if they had just treated me with basic respect. If they had simply recognized my expertise before I forced them to look at the ledger. But then I glance around at the powerful firm I helped build, and the talented people thriving because I made sure they weren't invisible. I know this is exactly where the intelligence auditor was meant to be. Knowing your own worth is never arrogance, it is tactical clarity. The exact second you stop begging weak people for recognition is the exact second the power dynamic permanently flips. If you found value in this story, if it resonated with the struggles you've faced in your own career, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support allows us to keep bringing these stories to light. Share this video with someone who is currently doing the invisible work. Send it to the guy who is the first one in and the last one out. Let them know that their time will come, but only if they are willing to stand up and demand the respect they have earned. And I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments down below, have you ever worked for a manager like Ray? Have you ever trained someone who ended up making significantly more money than you? How did you handle it? Did you walk away or did you stay and fight? Let's build a strong community in the comments. Read each other's stories, support each other. Remember, you are not just a cog in the corporate machine. You are the engine. Know your worth, secure your perimeter, and never let an arrogant fool tell you that you aren't leadership material. Stay strong, stay vigilant, and I'll see you in the next video.